Dean, your videographer from KNOM website. Welcome to the College of Complexes. Let us know if you'd like to see some more of these nice videos.
Dexter. Hey boy, back there on the fourth row on the third seat from the left. If you're going to sit in this classroom, oh, I'm ringing. Turn that thing down a bit. All right. Well, welcome to the college. As most of you know, Tom and Susan are off in Chicago for the month, enjoying family and holidays. What? Hard to hear. Well, I got reverberation. I'm hearing it almost too loud. Well, I'll turn the speaker down there a bit in your direction. Maybe that'll help. Does anybody have an announcement they need to make tonight about a meeting or anything? Okay.
Next Saturday the 20th at 11 a.m. there is a picnic/protest against government surveillance of private citizens. It's at Clyde Warren Park, which was the same place where the last one was. The next Saturday in a week, 11 a.m. Clyde Warren Park, anti-surveillance protest.
Well, thanks. Is anybody here for the first time tonight? Yes. Future speaker. He's going to get a sample of our format and our craziness. Oh, our output. Yes, two more. All right. I'll give you, I don't like to repeat our history lesson for everybody the 49th, 100th time, you know. But anyway, the group was started in Chicago back in the 1950s in a downtown place called the College Complex. It was an old downtown bar. And they've been meeting ever since. Tom and Susan Berry lived in Chicago all their lives, and they participated in the group, and they enjoyed it. They'll usually have 70 or 80 people there. It's been going a long time. It's in the middle of the inner city, so it's real easy for a lot of people just to, you know, walk over to the bar and have a Saturday night meeting and eat some food and anyway, that's the basic background of the group. Tom and Susan moved down here a little over 5 years ago because they had some family come this way, and they took the opportunity to get out of the cold weather. And Tom worked on the railroad for years. He got away from the brake dust and the hazards of being on the railroad. So they've enjoyed being here, and I met him, and he talked about this group, and after a while we decided we might start one up and give it a try. Well, that's not a fan, it's an air conditioner, and if they turn it down, we will cook. Because the air coming out of the ceiling is malfunctioning in some way, I don't know.
Maybe use the handheld mic.
You want to try to see if that works better? It's on.
Well, oh heavens, to murder control it. Well, it may be working a little clearer anyway. I don't think we really need to add anything else. That's just a brief summary of our background. I could talk about it some more, but that's the context of it. And we start up and we give a speaker 30 to 60 minutes to talk about whatever their heart's desire is. And then we have a question and answer period, and that varies in time depending on how many questions you have. Sometimes that's a very interesting part of the evening because questions bring out some things that we weren't anticipating. And then after that we have a period of time when each of you who wants to do it will be given several minutes to get up and give some of your comments. Those can be addition to what the speaker had to say, or they can be a rebuttal of the speaker's viewpoint and presentation, and that's the way it is. We limit the question and answer period to questions. Don't give us your comments during the questions. Give us the questions, and the speaker will answer them. He sits down while we're doing our comment section, takes a break, and he can pay some attention if he wants to what we say, and he gets to come up at the end and kind of close it out with a few minutes of comments to sort of cap it off, and sometimes those are directed back to what we have said. Varies a little bit from week to week, but it always has an interesting variety, and we appreciate everyone's input and the variety it brings to the group. Makes it interesting. I tell people when I talk to them about the group for the first time, I said, one of the things I've enjoyed about this meeting is a handful of times we've had a really boring speaker. Just, you kind of had to hold your eyelids open like some classes we've all gone to during school. But when we get to the question and answer period, sometimes it comes alive and turns out to be a very interesting meeting. So save your questions and do them when the time comes around, and then give us some of your great words of wisdom in the comment section. So our speaker is basically going to introduce himself. Tom did not get a biography and put it in the meeting notice when he came out with the meeting notice, so I asked him to give us a little thumbnail sketch of where he's coming from, so it puts what he says in some sort of perspective, okay? All right, that's enough for me. Come on up. Carry forth. Welcome him up.
You want to give me the, you want me to use that? Yeah.
That's working a little bit.
I usually don't use one of these, and for years I taught classes of 60 and never needed a microphone, so I'm not used to using them. So I hope if I vary or get it too far away or whatever during the night or too loud, you just let me know. I'll apologize. Give you a little introduction. I was raised in San Antonio, on the south side of San Antonio. Very fortunate. I lived in the city, but I was a block away from my granddad and my grandmother. They had 2 lots, one house on 2 lots with a horseshoe driveway and a cow lot in the back. And he was an old cattleman that had cattle out south of San Antonio. And where they kept their cattle was near a little town called Somerset. So in the summertime, I had the option of being down at my granddad's in the morning and going to the stockyards with he and my uncle, spending our mornings there, and then in the evenings would either be hauling cattle or out branding or dehorning, or maybe letting me drive the old Ford tractor, doing a little plowing and whatever. So I had a life that I could turn on the city or the country life like I had a switch. It was wonderful. I don't envy what the kids have nowadays. I wouldn't trade with them. I'm sure many of you feel the same way. I got my bachelor's degree at Texas Tech, got my teacher certification at North Texas State, got my master's degree at Texas Christian, and got my doctorate at A&M at Commerce. I've taught as a math professor in the Dallas County Community College District and as an adjunct graduate professor at A&M at Commerce, and a little short time as a mathematics lecturer at UTD. But I caught myself one time, all of a sudden, it just happened accidentally, but I was teaching at 3 schools, so at the end of the year I was so tired, I said I'm going back to 1 school alone. But at any rate, happy to have you here today. I now live in Frisco, and I'm retired. and happy to be with you. I've been wanting to come here just because I have a friend at a church where I go that's told me about you. Now, might give you a little feedback and a little other background on me as a young man. This is a picture of my dad, and that's his driver's license. And the reason I show that, because you can see that his middle name is Elmore. I contend that I'm the first man in history who ever had his dad named after him. And those of you guys that have been married know that women just decide what they're going to do, and they do it. You might find out what they did reasonably soon, and in this particular case, I didn't find out what my mother did totally until I was over 70 years old. But let me see if I accidentally, I've got to get this set up. I claim I'm the first individual in history who's been known to have his father named after him. On my birth certificate, my mother did not like the middle name Elmore. So what she did on the birth certificate, she reported my dad's name as Christian Earl and me as Christian Earl Jr. So she just renamed him right there. And so I thought, well, I understand that. And my sister died in 2008, and after that, she had some old family records, and my brother-in-law gave them to me, and when I took a look at them, here's the birth announcement. She even reported her name to be Ms. Christian Earl Boldt. So it did a very thorough job. Everybody she reported to, she changed our names. I want to show you an instance how I came into $1 million in only one day. I also came out pretty fast too, but I had been banking at the old Prestonwood State Bank years ago, and then I moved out and lived at Valley Ranch in the 80s and part of the 90s. And I forget what Preston State Bank changed their name to, but I think this was in 93. And I had a money market account at the branch in Irving, and I had my basic account there at Prestonwood in Highland Park. And I intended to transfer $10,000 from my money market account to my checking account. But evidently the accountant or whoever was doing the transferring made a little error, left the decimal point off. And if you leave the decimal point off of $10,000, it's $1 million. So they stuck $1 million in my checking account, but I wasn't checking it that closely. And the horrifying way that I found out about it was when I got a memo in the mail telling me that I had overdrawn my money market account by about over $950,000. Now that's enough to shake you up. Now what really astounded me, they corrected the money market account pretty fast, but it was still a day or two before they finally made the correction. So that was a blessing for a mathematics teacher, because I would start my classes off the first day, introduction, and tell them, look, when I grade your test, don't come to me and say, oh, look, I'm only off a decimal point or two. So it was helpful to me in what I did. Okay, I'm punching the wrong buttons here. I've had one of the first times I used this mouse to present stuff the battery was low, and the computer was just going everywhere. It was even acting up when I wasn't doing anything. So it was a horrifying experience. I finally got it under control, but I hope I can control it today. I usually stay out of the way where I'm probably blocking views. I think I'm gonna walk over there because I've got the speaker here, if that's okay. Will that be a problem if I do? Okay. I'm gonna come around and stand over here and discuss these. Basically, I consider about 4 basic purposes of this presentation: to counter the bad press that I feel Christianity has received over the last decade or two, to give Christianity credit where credit is due, to adequately define Christianity as the principles it promotes and make it clear it's not some splinter group guilty of malpractice, and there are plenty of those, and make it clear that Christianity has no equals in terms of its contributions to society and resultantly democracy. And I think when I go through these questions, you'll have a good feeling for what I'm talking about. Right now, based upon the World Almanac, this is the membership of the 5 major religions throughout the world. For Christianity, it's about 2,298,000,000. For Islam, it's about 1,568,000,000,000. Hindus, 960 million. Chinese folk religion, 468 million. And the Buddhists, about 468 million. If you'll notice, Christianity is about 47% larger than Islam. Here is an article they printed for me in the, very fortunately, they printed it in the Dallas Morning News last Sunday. And I had no idea when they would do it, but it somewhat applies to what we're covering today. I responded to a newspaper article entitled, "Can Islam Trust Democracy?" after they threw out the president of Egypt. And what I wrote was, I said, maybe the headline for this article should have been, "Can Democracy Trust Islam?" If one examines history and the predominantly Islamic countries of today, one is hard-pressed to find a predominantly Islamic country with a Bill of Human Rights for all the citizens of the country. The Islamic version of democracy turns out to be a disguised theocracy where the candidates for office are determined by Islamic clerics, and the net results of elections are simply to decide which Muslim will be selected to rule a nation. Now, they seem to be happy with that, but that's the truth, and that's the structure that's in place today. I'm going to define what I call a truly representative democracy, and I think that that's what we have here. And basically, it's based upon our Bill of Human Rights. And I say a truly legitimate representative democracy consists of a representative democratic republic which makes decisions based upon majority votes and which has a Bill of Human Rights which cannot be abrogated by a majority or plurality vote. And our Bill of Human Rights, where that came from, was basically Christianity, because they felt that these were, our Bill of Rights were God-given rights. That's where that concept came from. We take it for granted, but if you look throughout the world, it's hard to find. There's an article called The Dictator Learning Curve that had some comments. It says, today's dictators are far more sophisticated, savvy, and nimble than they once were. Instead of arresting or shooting members of a human rights group, they send out health and building inspectors to shut down their offices. Today's dictators pepper their speeches with references to liberty, justice, and the rule of law. Today, the Kremlin's operatives typically stop stuffing the ballot boxes when they reach 70%. In the old USSR, a black van would drive up to a dissident street in the night. They would be taken away and never seen again. Nowadays, they have an accident or are the victim of a random mugging. Now, this is a comment by Jean Kirkpatrick, who years ago bemoaned the fact that, as she stated, 67% of the United Nations members were dictatorships. What she said back at this time, years ago, I feel applies to the Arab Spring. You know, everybody says, oh boy, we've got democracy coming. We've got, things are going to be better. And at that time, years ago, probably the 80s, she said traditional authoritarian governments are less repressive than revolutionary autocracies. And that's what ended up happening in Egypt. They started persecuting the Christians, a few other nations also, killing them. It was a historic mistake, she said, for the United States to have shied away from dictators like the Somozas in Nicaragua and the Shah of Iran. If they served American interests, she asserted, they were defensible. The fact is, in countries that are predominantly Muslim, unless you have a secular, repressive leader, they won't be able to survive. Can you hear me okay? Okay, I can. And in fact, in Egypt, what we had was the Muslim Brotherhood in control. Here is their logo and motto. Allah is our objective, Muhammad is our prophet, jihad is our way, and dying in the way of Allah is our highest aspiration. And that was the heart and soul of where Egypt was going under Morsi. This was an article in Foreign Policy, and it's 100% in line with what Jean Kirkpatrick said. It's a sad fact that only about a third of the world's nations can be properly described as politically free. By giving equal voting power to every nation, the UN effectively becomes a democracy of dictators. And you know, I see that right now they're considering this motion by the United Nations, which will have an influence on our gun rights. And, you know, I have a problem with the United Nations taking priority over any of our decisions in the United States or any rights. One thing I wanted to point out before I start here, and it's something that I will speak about specifically with respect to Christianity, but just if you take religion in general, there are three very positive contributions that a religion can make to society. The first one is a provision of an individual code of conduct, something we teach our children when they're young. Secondly, the provision of an underlying ordering ideology for society. Whatever the society's values are, that's usually the product you'll get in terms of government. And the third is the provision of a source of psychological security and hope for the future. Now, I'm going to go into what I contend are the 10 challenging questions for Christianity's critics. And incidentally, you don't need to copy these. I've got a handout that will share them with you when we finish, all 10, if you're interested. Number one, which countries in the world whose founders and populations were/are not predominantly Christian would you want to live in? You know, I'd suggest whoever went through these questions sit down with a tablet and fill out their answers. Number two, Which countries in the world whose founders and populations were or are not predominantly Christian are legitimate, democratically representative republics with bills of human rights that cannot be abrogated by plurality or majority votes? As a friend of mine has pointed out, the U.S., because of its Christian religion, started off with the basis that we had God-given rights, and those are included in the Bill of Human Rights. Thirdly, which countries in the world whose founders and populations were or are not predominantly Christian have had large and significant incoming worldwide immigration statistics over an extended period of time? That speaks well for the countries that have that. That tells you a whole lot. 4, which countries in the world whose founders and populations were or are not predominantly Christian have made major charitable contributions to other less fortunate countries, all without regard to the religious preferences of the citizens in those countries? 5, which countries in the world whose founders and populations were or are not predominantly Christian have fought and died to preserve the freedom and sovereignty of other countries, all without regard to the citizens' religious preferences in that country, while gaining no additional territory for themselves? I don't know if it's right or wrong, but a couple of the wars we fought in the 90s were supporting Muslim populations against Christian. Number 6, which countries in the world whose founders and populations were or are not predominantly Christian have helped to rebuild an aggressor country which they've defeated in warfare? After all the expense we've had in some wars, then we've gone to more expense to go back and rebuild an aggressor country. Number 7, what religion could serve and or has historically served as a more constructive and humane underlying ordering ideology than Christianity in the pursuit of ethnic equality? That's been a big factor over here. And you know, people like to always compare the United States with absolute perfection, but if they compare it with all the other countries in the world, the U.S. comes out looking pretty good. Now, the next 3 are based upon the 3 functions that I say a religion should serve. And I say, what other source outside of Christianity for a personal code of conduct is as thorough, easily accessible, other-centered, loving, and completely non-discriminatory, based upon sex, religion, ethnicity, or nationality, and has a history of having better served humanity than the guidelines prescribed by Christ in the red letter portion of the New Testament? I say participation at this level is considered to be the adherent level. And you know, I've always liked, Thomas Jefferson wrote a pamphlet and it had the red letter part of the Bible. That's what he did. And he was also quoted as saying, if Christianity had been always presented as pure as it came from the lips of Christ, he said everybody at that time would have been Christian. 9, what other code of conduct outside of Christianity has a history of having better served as an underlying ordering ideology for a society's organizational and governing behaviors and as a basis for a nation's founding documents and bills of human rights than the guidelines prescribed by Christ in the red letter part of the New Testament? Participation at this level is considered to be the advocate level of participation. Albert Einstein said that Christianity and the Old Testament guidelines as presented by Christ could cure virtually all the ills of humanity. I thought that was a pretty nice endorsement to get. Let's see, that was 9. What is, okay, this is a preview. When I get into the believer portion of any religion or of the Christian religion, I look at it in terms of actual research that's been done. There's actual educational, academic research that has shown that having hope promotes optimism, and secondly, that optimism and psychological security propagate psychological, sociological, and physiological health. So if an individual has a choice, you know, I would say we have statistical evidence of a deity, but we don't have mathematical absolute evidence. And so the choice to, you know, in my own case, I believe, I'm a believer in a deity, and one of the reasons I am is all of my family's died, and I don't want to go through the rest of my life. I've loved them to death, and I don't want to go through the rest of my life thinking I'll never see them again, you know? So I'm making that choice just for my own psychological comfort, but I don't know that that's particularly wrong. And this is the last question, which replies that. What other conduit for interaction with the deity outside of Christianity provides all of the following types of hope? Hope for eternal life, hope for reuniting with departed loved ones, hope for universal eternal justice, hope for a protective advocate, Christ, with a deity, kind of like having our lawyer, and a hope for a loving, caring, forgiving, protective, omnipotent, omnipresent, and omniscient deity than the New Testament. Participation at this level is considered to be the believer level of participation. Now, here's a basic contention that I make, and this is something you might want to debate when it's over with. I say there are two types of people in the world, those who benefit from Christianity and those who both benefit from and support Christianity. And I would contend there wouldn't be a single democracy in the world with a Bill of Human Rights if it weren't for Christianity. Now, this is an amazing poll done in 2008 by the Pew poll. And it was a poll of Muslim Americans and how they felt about various things. The poll showed, based upon their responses, 86% of Muslim Americans believe the Quran is the Word of God. 50% believe the Quran should be taken literally, word for word. 41% under 30 years of age feel that suicide bombings of civilian targets can be justified. 47% think of themselves as a Muslim first and American second. 43% feel that mosques should express views on social matters. And 28% say they don't believe the Arabs carried out 9/11. And here are just two basic religious facts. There's no verse in the New Testament where Christians are instructed to harm non-Christians, but there are verses where they are instructed to treat non-Christians nicely. For example, therefore, as we have the opportunity, let us do good to all people. And I'll say, are they as they would want to be treated themselves, which we're all familiar with the golden rule. Number two, there's no verse in the Quran where the Muslims are instructed to treat non-Muslims nicely or as equals, but there are verses where they are instructed to harm non-Muslims. After 9/11, I read through the entire Quran, and the back of the handout I give you tonight, the front will be the 10 questions. The back will be a one-page document I entitled The Islamic Christian difference primer. And I took about a dozen different areas to show how the two religions differ in their views of that particular area. And I say, for example, and this is a verse out of the Quran, and I have 2 copies of the Quran. When the sacred months, which are 4 annual events, are over, so it's an annual event or more, are over, slay the idolaters wherever you find them. That's anybody that's not a Muslim. Arrest them, besiege them, and lie in ambush everywhere for them. Here's a contention I make, and this is one in addition to the other that I made earlier, and some people might want to contest this tonight. I contend that Islam as an underlying ordering ideology is incompatible with any truly legitimate democratic republic. And I base that based upon the rights that they propose in terms of women's rights. You know, under Sharia law, a woman has to have 4 witnesses for rape. Under Sharia law, in terms of inheritance, women only get half as much as men. And there are many other things you'll see on the handout. Here's a question I have, very probably controversial, but it's the truth. It's the unvarnished, politically incorrect, truthful question. And I ask this question: should any organization whose code of conduct and/or defining document instructs its members to harm non-members be classified as a religion or a terrorist organization? And I left off in any free democratic republic with a Bill of Human Rights. These are the 2 handouts I have. Basically what I did, they're all on one sheet. The questions are on the front, and the primer is on the back. And I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll hand those out now, if that'll be satisfactory with you folks. Glad I was able to make it through with that mouse tonight, because after that one experience where the battery was low, I mean the screen was going flipping from one frame to the other so fast it blow your mind. That's okay, I'll just count them out and hand them down. Okay, 4. You want 2? Oh, there are 2.
Another.
Look más. Coach, are we ready for questions now? That
We can do it anytime you want.
okay? Well, I'm wrapped with that, so okay. right here, right here.
Well, thank you so much. Let's give our speaker a hand and thank him for his presentation tonight. Is this our deal? Right, as you know, all of you who come, this is a time for question and answer, so let's open it up, and who has a question to start things off tonight? Did our speaker completely fill our minds and answer all our questions for starters? Almost didn't see your hand go up down here.
Well, it was a tentative hand. When I read what this program is going to be about, I was very thrilled, and I'm thrilled I'm here because you covered some things that I have been wondering about. In particular, the impact of Christianity as proclaimed by Christ on the let's say the non-hope part. But as far as people getting along, and this is good. I think, of course, one of the problems that Christianity has is a lot of Christians don't act Christian. And for example, in the Declaration, in our Constitution, we know that there was not the provision for slavery was slavery. The provision for women was non-vote. Now, we happen to know that was probably, it's my understanding that was not because all of our forefathers wanted it that way, but some did, and they acceded to it with the hope that it would happen in the future, which our Constitution has allowed. So anyway, I appreciate your presentation. It's very good.
Yeah, I'd like to, is this on, I'd just like to follow up. One thing I can say, you know, the population was split on that.
And, you know, I'm happy to be able to tell black minority that over 300,000 white Christians fought to free them, you know, but you're exactly right. We have grown, and I'm so happy to say that if you look at all the minorities, this is the place they want to come. Yeah, thank you for your comments.
Okay, let me get down there. Just give me a moment. And just, why don't you stay up here at the mic so that you can respond so we can hear you. And it'll go into the sound system where he's recording.
Okay.
In your opinion,
Turn it. Oh, the projector. Okay.
in your opinion, is Islam a religion or is it a political movement predominantly? And if so, what are the implications?
Prepping for tonight, I read one article where it pointed out it's basically a system. It's basically a system because it's always intertwined with the government. And that's what really happened here, because people said, oh boy, when the Arab Spring came along, we've got democracy coming. Well, you know, it's like one of the slides I had in there mentioned that their idea, or what they were calling democracy, was a situation where, like in Iran, the clerics determine who's going to run, and it's a matter of which Muslim is elected. And I might also say this, you know, our good, supposedly good friends, Saudi Arabia, you can't even have a Bible on the streets in Saudi Arabia. When we fought the war in the 90s, the first President Bush wanted to have some kind of a prayer service, and they had to go out on one of our ships to do it. So they're very intolerant. These people are very intolerant of other religions, And anytime they're in the strong majority, Christians are pretty well persecuted. I also have done research, and you know, that's why I define Christianity as the principles it stands for. But I've done research on the Crusades, and there were about 300 years of church burnings and killings before the Pope called for the Crusades as a defensive measure. And I've got a short treatise on that that gives all the details, everything happened building up to it, which makes you understand that they did that for survival.
All right, thank you very much. Who's next up in terms of question? Right here?
There's one over there.
No. Oh, here.
Dr. Boldt, I was very impressed with your presentation. Do you have additional presentations scheduled around the community?
No, I tell you what I've done. I have developed 28 PowerPoint presentations. So far I've given 13, and I'm going to develop 2 more and stop at 30, and then I'm going to make myself available to whoever would be interested. But thank you for asking.
Yeah, that's a good question. All right. Who's next up? I'll get you a mic. Staggering down, staggering down. Where does my sense of balance go when I'm 72 years old? I don't understand it.
Chris, a lot of these references, are you getting these from the Old and New Testament?
Okay, I'm sorry, I couldn't hear.
Are you getting these references from the New Testament? Are you drawing solely from the New Testament when you refer to Christianity?
If you look, are you talking about on the handout?
Yeah.
No, the ones from the New Testament are referred to the New Testament. The others refer to the Quran, and I give the page numbers or the surah and verse. I have 2 versions of the Quran. One is published by the Muslim Foundation. The other is published by, gosh, it's listed there. I'm trying to remember the name. It's just an American book company. And I've gone through a bunch of those, and I've got a lot more on that, but as I looked at them, I really didn't see any, you know, it's kind of like our versions of the New Testament and the Bible. The wording is different, but I didn't run into any wording on those verses I mentioned there that weren't mutually agreeable before I put them in.
Okay, these all do look to be New Testament. Are you basing this standpoint mostly on the post-Christ, the post-prophet laws and things following that in the New Testament, as far as positions concerning law, revenge, war, democracy, these types of things? Are you getting these from the New Testament?
Yes. Let me say this, because as far as I'm concerned, the Christian dispensation, the guidelines for practice in the Christian dispensation are all in the New Testament. We don't do a lot of things they did back in the Old Testament, like put blood on our doors and things like that. So I basically just work off of that New Testament as the code of conduct for Christians.
Okay, so you're aware that the religious people, all the C's and the Ites and Icans of all of the days of holiness pre-New Testament, in terms of human-to-human punishment, they were pretty gory pre-Testament. So you're making this New Testament.
Yes, exactly. Okay. You're exactly right. And
all the different kinds of eyes.
Yeah, I've had a Jewish friend or two that maybe had a little difficulty with that, but we don't do a bunch of the stuff. No human-to-human punishment is prescribed in the New Testament.
Okay, well then I'm going to be nice to you, because I was like, are you kidding? We've done horrible things.
And that's why I define Christianity as the principles, because when you've got the largest religion in the world with over, what is it? I say 2 billion. You're going to have your share of malpractice. So I define Christianity, and the definition I gave in the presentation is the principles, because, and I've mentioned splinter groups guilty of malpractice. Yeah, I know that. I agree. The human element's difficult to overcome,
like
even on our individual basis.
Yeah. And positions concerning terrorism, you say no predominantly Christian countries support terrorism and international warfare. You don't think we're supporting terrorists to some degree or other? Right now?
You might have a point on that one. There's a lot I don't know about, we're finding out stuff now, but let me say this. It's not out in the open where the people can really get after it.
No, it's not. But don't you think that we arm people that we have to go to war with and intervene on tomorrow?
Well, let me say this.
Not openly. No.
Yeah, we've gone to war, and I originally thought, well, when they went to war in Iraq, I was pretty supportive of that, and I felt it was an experiment to see if you could actually build a legitimate democracy with a Bill of Human Rights in that country. And we did everything we could to help them, but I don't think it worked, and I don't think that where you have that underlying ordering ideology be predominant, that you can ever, it's just inconsistent with a democratic republic with a Bill of Human Rights.
Okay, do you make a distinction between the Christians and the Christian extremists?
And the Christian and the what?
Christian extremism.
Well, give me your definition of Christian extremism.
Strong fundamentalist religious laws, when in the New Testament this prophet came to do away with the law and talked about the spirit of the law. He came to do away with the law.
Exactly.
And here we have these fundamentalists that are just nuts.
Well, let me tell you where I come from on that. I'll be very honest with you. I don't think you need, I agree with Thomas Jefferson, I don't think you need any more than Christ's guidelines. I went through the book of Matthew, and I said, I'm going to go through the book of Matthew and only write down, I wish I'd have brought this as a handout tonight, but anyway, I went through the entire book of Matthew and only wrote down guidelines for living in the red letter edition stated by Christ. When I started out, I thought I would have 30 or 35. It's just the book of Matthew. I ended up with 104. Yeah, and that's enough for me. Let me say this: you have to be real careful to go around saying, "Well, I accept the Bible as my conduit with the New Testament is my conduit with the deity," but I can't sit here and tell you that I think that it's perfect. And I'll tell you why. In terms of, there might be an error. I don't think there are any major errors with what Christ said, but in terms of the Bible itself, there's a point where it said that Christ carried his cross, and another point where it said, another book where it said that another individual carried his cross. So I mean, there's some little things like that, and so if somebody points that out to me and I'm telling them, hey, it's perfect, that makes my credibility a little weak. But I do accept what was said by Christ throughout the entire New Testament as a guideline for living. And you know what? He wasn't big on church bureaucracies. He's the one, he spoke of, hey, these guys that walk around in their flowing robes and that. He was just down to earth. I know some people that say they are into practicing the religion that Christ practiced, not the one that's been developed since he died.
Okay. With the Christian extremism, the fundamentalist extremism, what I'm referring to are people that take all of these allegorical writings literally, and I could quid pro quo with you on that all night. But on the Islam, do you make a distinction between the Islamic extremism and the Islam's, the extremism being Sharia law and the crazies? Because I've seen these people online holding up signs going, hey, look, the Sharias to us are what Jonestown is to Christianity. We didn't do this. Do you make a distinction between the extremism in that faith also?
Well, my experience, and I've looked for them, I've not seen, and at some point I thought I had this mentioned in there, but anyway, I've not seen any Muslim who forswore any part of the Quran. And in most of the predominantly Muslim countries, it'd be a death sentence if they did, just as it is a death sentence for a Muslim in many of the Muslim countries to convert over to Christianity. And that's not something you see in any predominantly Christian nation. In any predominantly Christian nation, those individuals can convert over to Islam and nothing's done or said. So we're not looking at an equitable situation here. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Chris, for your presentation. One comment I want to make right there at the end. When I lived in Bolivia, I served as a Protestant missionary down there.
Oh.
And this was back in the 60s. In fact, it was right when Kennedy was being assassinated here in Dallas. It was a death penalty in Bolivia and throughout South America to teach Protestantism, because the Catholics had a dictatorship politically and militarily and religiously.
I did not know that.
And they had that written into their constitutions.
Did everybody hear that? That's news to me. Go ahead. Please.
So, you know, when they settled Latin America in the 1500s, the conquistadors came from Spain with the blessing of the Pope to rob those countries of all their gold and silver and build an enormous Spanish empire. And part of the process of that was to enslave the Amerindians down there. And that was in 1520, 1540, and so forth. In 1915, I think, at the end of World War I, after 400 years, they finally released that doctrine of killing Protestants if they tried to teach Protestantism. I mean, I think the lady back there was making a point, you know, that
right.
we have the Crusades were done for monetary reasons predominantly, because the church made money off those. The pilgrims would go down to Jerusalem and would go through churches and touch relics.
I might have read the wrong book.
And they paid the church money for that because it healed them. And the church was having problems getting pilgrims to go to Jerusalem, the Holy Lands, because of Muslims. So they sent the Crusaders down there, as you said, for 300 years, from 11 to about, I guess, 13 something. And that was to protect pilgrims so the church could make more money off the relics. And in the process of doing that, those knights that left Europe and went to the Holy Lands had to go through Byzantium, Greece.
Had to go through the
Byzantium, the Christian. The Christian.
Oh, okay.
The Christian version of the Eastern Orthodox Church, which was based out of Istanbul. Christians had to go through there on their route to the Holy Lands. They had to go through Turkey to get down to Jerusalem. And while they were there, they decided to kill as many of their brethren, their Christian Orthodox, who they disagreed with because they were Catholic. And so they sacked and destroyed and did horrible damage to this other Christian empire that they were supposed to be, you know, brothers and sisters.
Was that after the start of the Crusades?
That was the Crusades.
That was, okay,
Yeah,
but
they did all that on the way, beginning in 1095,
Yeah.
on the way down to.
what I had read was just the history up to the declaration of the Crusades. So what you know is very enlightening to me. I'm not that familiar with it.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just going to make a comment that since your background is in math,
Right.
Math, in my understanding, does a form of thinking called deductive reasoning
Deductive,
rather versus inductive reasoning.
right, and
So-
statistics uses inductive.
And if you take the Bible, the red letter edition or some approved edition, and you put it up in its, as if it were inerrant, and there was no controversy or ambiguity about it, you can do the kind of reasoning you were doing, which is sort of the way a mathematician would read the Bible. And I just thought I would mention to you, have you thought about doing research, historical research in the problems of the synoptic gospels and the comparisons of Paul and Jesus from outside sources and not from within your own mindset?
No, and I just basically, the Christianity to me is the guidelines for living by Christ, and having gone through what I have, I think all of them can be logically deduced from the golden rule, do unto others you have them do unto you. Everything he said that I've seen has been very, very loving and considerate and helpful of other people and very self-sacrificing. And I loved his humility, like when he washed the disciples' feet. And the things what I don't like about Christianity, although they're not as bad as other religious situations I've seen, I'm not big on any of the bureaucracies, and I really prefer churches without the bureaucracies. But by the same token, I have friends that worship there and their lives are good, and so I'm not going to judge them. Yeah.
I didn't know, Chris, if you mentioned, I thought I heard you say that you thought that America was the most religious country in the world. Did I hear you say that?
But what I said was that I've heard that the Bill of Human Rights were quite unique and because they went on the assumption that the rights were given were God-given and wouldn't be voted on, and that was unique compared with constitutions prior to that.
So do you think that Christianity and democracy are somehow connected?
Undoubtedly.
Or organically?
Undoubtedly.
Because the early Christian community was not democratic, and they were part of the Roman Empire. And the
Constitution and the Declaration of Independence are what I base it on. I'm sure that they had their share of bad people too, but based upon the documents they came up with, it's the best I've ever seen in the history of the world.
Yeah, Jefferson is on record through an author named Creel, I think his name was, saying that he went to the New Testament as he was developing our Bill of Rights, our Constitution, and so forth. But then he also borrowed heavily from Confucius. And then this guy gives quotes and footnotes and so forth about how many things that Confucius had said that he sort of added on to or developed into a doctrine of democracy.
A good point, and I might mention that, there were people around before Christ came down the pike, and a Chinese friend of mine told me that long before Christ came, I think it was a Confucius quote. He said Confucius had a version of the Golden Rule, and it was this way, it's logically equivalent: don't treat others like you don't want to be treated yourself.
Yeah, the silver rule.
Yeah. So, and I thought, and there's a point in the New Testament where it says, others are a law unto themselves that have never heard of Christianity, and it says they'll be considered righteous too.
Second chapter of Romans.
I believe that's right.
Yeah, that's what that is. Yeah. Yeah, I'm just curious.
You know more about, you studied the Bible more than I have, but he was in theology.
Yeah, I went to seminary.
Right.
When you were teaching math, so I was actually wrestling with some of these things a long time ago, and giving up on calculus. I never could figure calculus.
Hey, it's nothing but, let me tell you, people learn what they want to learn, and they don't learn what they don't want to learn. In my youth, when I was in high school, I wasn't into math, and I caught on after I minored in industrial engineering. And then I went back and retook courses I hadn't even taken. I said, I'm going to learn this stuff and learn it right. And fortunately, it was when the modern math had just come in. And the important thing about the modern math was when they taught people mathematics, they said, look, if you're going to do something, be able to justify it in terms of a principle. And I felt blessed to have come along at that time, because that's the way I taught my students in the beginning. I covered about 21 mathematical principles. I considered my first 2 weeks of college algebra boot camp, and I had them at the end of that 2 weeks where I could give them a series of about 30 steps of a proof of some kind, and I made them justify everything that was done. Yeah.
Well, thanks, Chris.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Yeah, the microphone over here.
I'm wondering if you found a church, or and it could be a completely independent church, or any form of Christianity or church which is that you consider to be as close to following the principles of Christ, rather than being hierarchically caught up in the hierarchy. Have you found something that you could recommend?
You know, I go to a bunch of different churches, and I go from one extreme to the other. Having been raised as a young man in a fundamentalistic church, I've been a member of 3 or 4 churches in my lifetime. Now I'm attending one that I've never joined, but and I've kind of got out of the joining stuff, but I show up and I support. I believe in support, and as I said there, you know, there are two types of people in the world, and but I try to go where I can be a herd and a help and an influence. And as a divorced individual, there's some churches that are so straight that they wouldn't want to hear anything I've got to say, you know. So I basically have gone to, excuse me, oh gosh, let me tell you, I've covered all ends of the spectrum up until January the 1st. I was going in the mornings to a Unity church on Sunday, and at night to the old First Baptist, because that's where they still sang the old gospel songs. When I was a kid, they'd fill the place up, and it was like going back in time, and I loved it. And you know, they stopped having that night service when they got the others. And beside that, I had a good friend there named Bert Berry. Maybe some of you knew him. He was a lawyer and also a good friend of Doak Walker, and played baseball at SMU, and I worked quite often for him as a expert witness. I'm going to tell you a story about it if I can. This is a funny story. One time we had a case where there was this guy from a small town a little bit south of Dallas, had already been beat by Bert on 3 points. And he appealed the case on 3 points. And so Bert had me come in at that point, and I met him at his office. He has his own office building downtown. And he said, well, Chris, he said, you just follow me, and I'll show you where to park, and then we'll walk over to the courthouse from there. That's the way he talked. So I loved the guy. I did, and I followed him, and we parked in the parking lot behind the textbook depository. So he drove in, he had about a 5-year-old Cadillac at least, and then I drove my car in beside him. And when we got out of the car, he said, well, Chris, he said, about 2 months ago when I parked here, he said, when I came back to my car, somebody had knocked my driver window out and stole my radio. So we went in and handled the case, and it was this guy from south of Dallas, from a small town, that appealed it. He didn't get an expert witness, and it was so bad that the judge called a recess for me to explain the mathematics to him for 30 minutes, which is I've never seen before done by the opposing expert witness. But then as I left, as we finished, Bert says, well, Chris, he says, I'm going to go meet with my clients. And he said, but that's good. He said, you finished for the day, and thank you, and hey, we'll be seeing you. So I walk back out to the parking lot. I get in my car. I start it up. I look over at Bert's car. Somebody had knocked his window out again and stole his radio again. You know, towards the end of the year, I used to see him, he and his wife, every night at church. I think their health is bad. I haven't seen that he's passed away, but I've been meaning to call because towards the last month or two, they weren't showing up, and they were always showing up, and they, like me, sat in the back, and we always enjoyed touching base. Yeah.
So do you still go to the church?
Yes, ma'am. I'm not a member, but I go there, and I feel, and let me tell you, I feel like that's where I can be the best influence. And I sent in a petition, I'm trying to, the purpose, and I remind them about this, the purpose of unity, as stated by the founders, was to study the teachings of Christ and not necessarily replace your church. But it study the teaching of Christ and invite anybody else in to study those with them. Well, they had a cross in the sanctuary. So they took it out and they put curtains up behind the deal. So within the last 2 weeks, I wrote a letter about it, and I've got a bunch of people kind of supporting it now to get the cross back up behind the pulpit. They were trying to, I think, be politically correct some way or another. It's okay. They say, look, we're going to study Christ's teachings, and all religions are welcome to come do it with us. Well, as far as I'm concerned, that's kind of a recruitment technique. But I wouldn't, if I had a young child, I wouldn't be sending them there. Because I don't think they're that, I think young kids need to have guidelines for living, and I consider the New Testament, and especially Christ's teachings, a good source of those. Well, folks, anything else?
I had an observation, maybe a question, but I may have forgotten. But several things crossed my mind. One is I have been studying some about the world history. I've been studying some world history recently, and at one time, I think in about 1200, 1300, somewhere in that area, the Islam movement progressed a great deal and conquered a lot of territory, and were very powerful in many parts of the world, more powerful than they are now, and that they treated Christians and Jews with some respect because they considered them people of the book. And I believe, I don't know this for sure, but I believe that perhaps someone heard that Islam considers Jesus a prophet as opposed to...
He's mentioned in the Quran.
But anyway, they did seem to treat, if this is right, the Jewish people and the Christians with certain respect. As I understand it, they didn't have the full rights, and they were charged more for things like that. I don't know. But anyway, but it seems like to me, if that's true, then the people who are running the Islam governments now have a different perspective, and it seems to be the jihad perspective. And so I'm wondering, also though, we were not, the world was not a democratic world in 1200. As a matter of fact, as you know, the Protestants and the Catholics had a lot of battles. And it's my understanding that's partly because the Protestants considered the Catholics as being part of the government. And anyway, so I don't know all about that, but I guess where I'm going with that is that I wonder where we are now. Go back a minute. I want to read to you a sentence from the Declaration of Independence. It's the first sentence of the second paragraph. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, that's supposedly what, if everybody, if that was uniform and all governments respected that, which I think that would be in keeping with what Christ would have believed.
Yeah, closer if we hear some of...
Up here. Yeah, I was at a wedding not too long ago, and these people were honoring the bridegroom, and all these people kept getting up there and speaking like this. And I thought about this meeting. I said, they need to come to the College of Complexes so that they can learn how to use these microphones. Anyway, I'm wondering, and you said last week or a week before last that Islam was the fastest growing organized religion in the world. Is that right? And even though we got those statistics that they're still far behind, it's very disconcerting to see where we may be going. So that's just kind of observational. But my question would be this: do you believe that their lack of democratic beliefs in their approach to government is going to cause us a lot of problems?
You know, Japan is not at all inviting to Muslims. They've got a number of things they do there, which is somewhat of an apartheid of sorts. But when people say to me that radicalism is the one that's doing what they're doing, having read the Quran, what I see radical Islam doing is what the Quran's telling them what to do. So that's what their book is telling them what to do. So I don't see them as radical. I just see them as practitioners.
Yeah, there are a lot of and I guess the vast majority of Muslims are moderate.
But they don't
hear about that 5 or 10%.
Yeah, and the problem is they don't speak out very much, hardly at all, and they probably have trouble forswearing any part of the Quran.
Now, they get kids.
You got exactly right. Let me just say one other thing that kind of sums this up. The New Testament, to me, is a tool to make the lives of others and my own better. And if somebody can come up with a better tool, let me know about it. But in the meantime, after examining over the years, it's the one that, you know, I found most beneficial to myself. I'm so thankful for the upbringing I had within a church. And I was raised in a church without a bureaucracy. But I'll say this, that churches with bureaucracy are doing a lot of good too, so I'm not going to judge them, but that's just my own taste.
I have a question. Just by the way, I was brought up in England, and we were all Church of England, and everybody else was nonconformist. So I guess most of Americans are nonconformists. You seem to imply that you thought the USA was a Christian country, which I'd like to believe was true. Why do you think it is that the Christian people here seem to be led by an elite whose main occupation seems to be greed and corruption.
Oh, yeah, that's why I define Christianity as the principles. And obviously there's a lot of malpractice, and there are a lot of fraudulent people that are using Christianity.
Why do they get away with it, though? That's the question.
Well, it's very difficult. It's a free country, and I guess that's why I'd say why. But I also know a lot of very wonderful people that I think the world of.
Well, I agree.
Yeah.
But look, this country has been terribly damaged by these people that are totally un-Christian in their attitude and everything they do.
You're right.
And they get away with it.
Hey,
and we vote them into office again and again and again.
I don't disagree.
My question to you, you lived here a long time. Why is it? Why are people so duped?
We're taught as Christians to turn the other cheek.
What was that?
I said the reason might be is as Christians we're taught to turn the other cheek.
I'm sorry.
We are taught to turn the other cheek.
Wait, you might have a point there. You might have a point. Would you like to speak? She'd like to ask a question.
Do you base your theology exclusively on the four Gospels and the Acts of the Apostles, and pretty much put the Pauline and Petrine epistles kind of on the back burner because those epistles are some of the most misogynist garbage I've ever heard in my life, and I pretty much base my theology exclusively on the Gospels. Do you do the same?
You base your theology based upon what?
The Gospels themselves, the four Gospels.
Let me say
and
this.
the Acts of the Apostles.
Well, I'm probably narrowed down even more than you because I go basically just off of the guidelines for Christ. I think I accept Christ as having been perfect, and as a result, I think that he said all that needed to be said. So for my own life, I try to follow his guidelines, and I think that's all I need. I don't need any of the other history. As I said earlier, part of it was wrong.
And to clarify that, are you saying the direct quotations of Christ alone?
I think that's all we need.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that.
Red letter, yeah, that's my view. I don't say that's necessarily the one and only, but it's just the one that I follow. And like I say, I went through Matthew alone. There were 104. That gives me all I need to do. If somebody's already got those under control and started somewhere else, they're way ahead of me.
Just offhand and on the spur of the moment, I can think of two countries that refute your argument: India and Israel. Both of them have very solid, and they are modern countries. We're not even going back into history, where the caliphate, that you mentioned earlier, the Turkish caliphate was very reasonable. The Turkish caliphate was very reasonable to other religions. But two countries, modern countries, that refute your argument are India and Israel. India, predominantly Hindu, has a very solid constitution and answers most of the questions on here, and the same with Israel, and predominantly Jewish.
Didn't India get some help from Britain, a Christian country, in setting up their government? And the other point I want to say is this: in Israel, a Christian can't have a Christian church over there. So they're not as big into the Bill of Human Rights as Christianity is.
Well, there are a lot of Arabs live in Israel, and they function perfectly well, and they have a mosque there.
I haven't heard of them having a mosque, and I have heard that Christians can't have a church.
I don't know that for a fact.
Can you give me the name of the mosque? I'll Google that when I get home. Or where it's located?
I'm sorry, I'm a little deaf, so I didn't hear.
Okay, could you give me either the name of the mosque or the location? I would like to Google that, because the information I have is that no other religions can own church property or mosque property in Israel.
Okay, I leave it up to you to research it then.
I'll check that out.
Chris, I think in Jerusalem,
Right.
I think there are 3.
Oh, you're right there. He just pointed out, and that was the, what is that location?
It's the old temple.
Yeah, the old temple. Okay, but that would be, yeah, that's kind of an exception.
It's over up the law.
I believe that's right. You're right. And all 3 of them are kind of centered on that because of Abraham, I believe. Isn't that right?
Okay, guys, we have we basically used up our initial time.
Yeah. Thank you very much. And hey,
good questions.
It's wonderful to disagree and everybody be so civil. Oh my God.
Our speaker still has life and limb. Let's go to the comment section, and we'll open up the floor for those of you who'd like to go up to the mic where you're in front of us and offer us the comments, 4 or 5 minutes, and then we'll move on from there. Welcome up to Jim.
Thanks for coming. It was good. I enjoyed it. Let's see. I want to say something really good about Christianity, and I want to say something really bad about it. Can you hear me now? Okay. The good part is the love your neighbor as yourself part, which means there's no Jew and no Gentile.
I'm sorry, I can't.
There's no Jew, there's no Gentile. That's the good part about it. I need the mic. Where's the mic?
Yeah, give me the mic. This is much more clear.
Can you hear me now?
That's better. And you hold it right up there.
Okay. There's no Jew, there's no Gentile, which means that we're all brothers. So I interpret that, what I credit Christianity with is the eradication of slavery worldwide. Because if you do buy into that, you cannot enslave your brother, because everybody's your brother. No Jew, no Gentile, no inferiors. And I credit Christianity with that. And by the way, so does H.G. Wells. H.G. Wells also credits him with that. Now, the other thing that I credit Christianity with is the idea of inalienable God-given rights. That is the equivalent to the separation of church and state, which we've managed in the West. We've managed that, and no state can give nor take away inalienable God-given rights. So I credit Christianity with that in the West. That's the good part. The bad part about Christianity is this. You talked about principles, and my question is, what principle are you talking about? It's too broad. Now, the principle that I like is this, is that there's no Jew, there's no Gentile, we're all brothers, we're all sisters, we have no right to abuse anybody, okay? No right to abuse anybody because we're all God's children, right?
Okay, I'm sorry, I don't hear good.
Abuse, enslave?
Hold it like this.
Is this better?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay. So we're no right to do that. But here's the problem. When you say which principle, there are some principles that led to the Crusades, which you explained. There's another principle that led to the Inquisition. So my argument is this, you have to be careful. Now, I would settle for one single principle. And the single principle that I would settle for, which doesn't make me a Christian, but makes me agreeable with Christians, and that is that we're all brothers and sisters and we should love one another as ourselves. That's all I got to say.
someone want to talk before I do? Does someone want to talk before I do, or do you want me to go next? Does someone want to talk before I do, or do I go next?
Well, go ahead, you can make some comments.
Okay, I have.
Okay, you want to go first? Fine.
Oh, I thought we were coming up to the podium. This one is working, these are not? Okay. I'm sorry I missed most of your presentation. I was busy putting up shelves and forgot the time, but I would like to point out that there are principles in history, throughout the history of humanity, that are very fine and high principles. For instance, even though we look at ancient Egypt as being very paganistic, oh, I'm sorry, you're not hearing. Yeah, got it. Yeah, that's a lot louder. Can you hear this? There are principles that have existed throughout the history of humanity, as far as I can tell. Ancient Egypt had an empire that lasted for 5,000 years. Now, there's a reason for that. Although they, on the surface, they had gods and goddesses, a whole bunch of them, there was one goddess by the name of Ma'at, and the priest said that Ma'at gave these edicts, which actually became national laws for Egypt, one of which was always speak the truth to everyone. Another of which was always treat everyone in a kindly manner. Now, these were national principles that these people lived by, and hence they were extremely peaceful and extremely prosperous. And as a matter of fact, the Egyptians did not invent the chariot. That was brought in by a tribe that immigrated from the Middle East and eventually, through their numbers, wanting total power, took over control with a revolution and destroyed that 5,000-year empire. John mentioned something that I thought a lot about as well. Why is this happening in the United States? Because I think that area where there is a lot of good will come under the most immediate attack of the beliefs of evil. And there is a concerted effort today, has been going on probably for centuries, to have a one world government that is anything but anything like we would want to have. Be a total dictatorship. I'm sure nobody has done this yet, but go to Wikipedia and look up the Georgia Guidestones. They have listed out on this mini Stonehenge in a county in Georgia principles, the first of which is maintain the earth at a sustainable population of 500 million. That's what, 6.5 million murders that have to happen between now and then. This is a principle that these people who are obsessed with greed and lust for power are doing everything they can, and they're brilliant, a lot of them. They're sociopaths, they're very intelligent, they have infiltrated through most governments in the world, and they are slowly tearing down our principles. And we need to wake up. As Yuri Bezmenov, I've mentioned him a dozen times here, says in his interview, the United States is the last bastion of freedom on earth, and wake up because you've almost lost it. And also, I look back at the ancient Egyptian Book of the Dead. They had a set of 10 commandments thousands of years before ours that were essentially the same, all however stated in the positive of I did this instead of thou shalt not. And they also had a principle where we have, supposedly from Jesus, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. In the ancient Egyptian, it was do unto others as they would have you do unto them, which, in my opinion, is far more spiritually elevated in consciousness than ours, because it is not just judging it from our personality and our viewpoints, it's looking at their needs and their wants and supplying that to them. I think I love Christianity, I am a Christian, I believe in those principles, but I think that God has been around a lot longer than all of our civilizations, and those are the principles that we must adhere to, however we find them. And the kingdom of heaven being within means that you need to find them in your own consciousness. And that's by being very quiet and listening. In stillness and silence shall be thy salvation. I could go on and I won't, but who's next?
Okay, who's next up?
Does anybody else want to go?
Okay. For the record, I'm Episcopalian. I'm also very rare very common in the 19th century, but rare today. A Christian hard leftist, and in the early days of the church, under Roman oppression, there was no profit motive. There was no ownership of property. Everything, it's in the Acts of the Apostles, everything was given, laid at the apostles' feet and distributed according to need. This lasted for about 250 years until Constantine realized that he couldn't, no matter how many he threw the lines, he couldn't stop movement. So he took it over, he co-opted it. And so things have never been the same. Another very bad event which occurred in 1054, well, it had been brewing for a while, but that was the Great Schism when Roman Catholicism embraced some heresies, the speaker would call them malpractices, and split from Greek Orthodoxy. And of all the forces of evil in history, by far the greatest is the Roman Catholic Church. And that's an inconvenient truth to some, but it's very, very true. And had the world stayed more in the Orthodox perspective, our history wouldn't have been anywhere near as bloody. For centuries, for 500 years, starting with the ascendancy to power of Pope Innocent III and continued by his immediate successor, Honorius II. This was at the beginning of the 13th century. The Inquisition and witch hunts were hatched, and the medical profession as we know it, what came out of that. And for the next 500 years, possibly millions of people were burned at the stake. Women, actual sexual minorities, people who they fraudulently, intentionally mislabeled as sexual minorities, peasant revolts, anyone, scientists of any kind, were all burned at the stake as witches or as heretics. And the exact number probably will never be known, but the carnage was so grave that the first real wave of immigration into the land that now is the United States were refugees from all that. And so in many ways, this country was founded on the backlash to some of the worst atrocities in the history of the world up to that point in time. Of course, those atrocities were far exceeded in the 20th century, but I'm not trying not to take up too long, but the Protestant Reformation in part tried to address some of these crimes against humanity, but in other ways it didn't go far enough. They perpetrated quite a bit of their own in terms of witch hunts and burnings at the stake. What happened at Salem, Massachusetts was just the last gasp of this huge wave of atrocities that have been raging for half a millennium. And so Christian liberals were emerging in the colonies, and these were about half of the founders. The other half were deists, which was a fad in the 18th century, which is extinct now. They were people who believed in God but did not subscribe to any particular religion. So half the framers of half of the Continental Congress and half the framers of the Constitution were Episcopal Christians, and half were deists. Of course, there are no more deists today, but a lot of the democratic tendencies of the country were bought and paid for with the blood of possibly millions of martyrs that were spilled over the span of 500 years. And the wretched excesses of some of the people in power even today, e.g. the needless slaughter in Vietnam and the needless slaughter in Iraq over oil just to get more oil, are being perpetrated by the descendants of these inquisitors and witch hunters. And in the 60s, after Malcolm X made his pilgrimage, he saw a great need for an Islamic counterpart to the Christian left. And he was starting to hatch that when, by no coincidence, his brains were blown out, or his guts were blown out. But I guess the last point I want to get in there is, well, let me see before I lose it. Darn it, I lost it. I kind of got sidetracked with Malcolm X, but what I'm trying to say is that there are today a lot of good peace churches in this town. I won't name any of them right off, but I've been to several, and they do exist, but they're not the ones who are calling the shots in this country. The ones that are calling the shots are the ones that still are the male supremacist, white supremacist elites who are just running our planet into ruin and ruining the lives of billions of people. And both progressive Christian and non-Christian alike need to work together to try to stop this travesty, because that's why so many people have become atheists.
All right, very good. Can we stop the friendly timer? Reset the friendly timer. +2. Ray, come on up. I wasn't going to stick you in the ribs.
One of the things that has kind of impressed me here lately, even on KERA, when you watch it with some of their advertising, and also just some news coverage. My wife and I were watching some of the carrying on in Egypt, and the news commentator says, what you are about to see has very disturbing images. Then you just brace for it. What in the world are they going to show? Disturbing images. Well, they were showing where some women were demonstrating at Tahrir Square in Cairo, and a number of these women were letting their voices be known. And then all of a sudden, a mob of these men, Islamist men, took off this woman, took her away, and you could see that something is very bad going to happen to this woman. And of course, it did. This is happening many, many times. This is how they rate women. Women are to be suppressed, and they are to be used. One of the advertisements has what I think is an Indian woman, and she is simply saying, I thought the whole time I was growing up, and whenever I got married, my husband was supposed to beat me. I just expected to get beaten. These are people who live in the 14th century, and they have 14th century ideas. There is no system, no religion, no thought in this whole world that has freed women like Christianity. Chris has mentioned some of that. He touched on it already. You want to know where women are free? You want to know where women can speak out? You want to know where women have a real life and are equal. The Bible says that you treat your wife as you treat yourself. You treat her as an equal. And all of that is something that has redounded to women being special, elevated, important, loved. These other religions, women are to be suppressed and used. Something to think about.
All right, gang. Good Lord. Just a minute. Let me get this thing stopped and reset. Does anybody else have comments tonight? I've been a little bit ragged at emceeing this evening. I apologize. Well, I will, it's 8:27. We've done pretty good. I guess I'll put my Tom hat on for a moment and I'll make a few comments. I found an interesting book several years ago up at Half Price Books, which I bought. And I haven't read every line of the book, but I've read a lot of the things in there. And basically the book has accumulated comments of our founding fathers, and then after that period of time, comments made by the ruling leaders and heads of political parties and people whose names we would mostly recognize. And, you know, after living here in the United States for all of my 72 years, I've read a lot and I've seen a lot of evolution occur in what comes out of our public government in terms of statements. If you go back and read the comments that this book has selected, and they have been selected, they're not dissertations of Thomas Jefferson or dissertations of George Washington. What his intent was to pick up the Christian references that were made by the founding fathers before the country was founded, as the country was founded, and the foundations that were used in putting together the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. The comment tonight about a lot of the people being agnostic is true. I think that percentage may apply to the writers of the documents, would not apply to the people who signed the Declaration. You know, the United States was not founded by people who came here from Japan with their religion. It was not founded by people who came here from China with their religion. It was not founded by people who came from India with their religion. It was not founded from people of the Middle East who came here as Muslims. Now we have all of the above, don't we? Our country has become very broad and diverse in its acceptance of people of all religious faiths. But the people who framed the Constitution, whether they were active Sunday school teachers down at the Anglican Church or not, they came from England and Northern Europe. They were either Catholic, Church of England, or Lutheran in their family histories and backgrounds. Whether they were practicing down at the altar every Sunday or not is irrelevant. What is relevant is that their frame of thinking and foundation had a strong Christian framework in it. Christians don't all think alike, do we? What do we have, 87 denominations of the Christian church in the United States, plus some that aren't affiliated with anything or anybody. A little shade tree place down on the corner, you know. You can believe whatever you want to believe. So it becomes very difficult and challenging to discuss Christianity. The Muslim faith you can basically put into 3 categories, but then they're not all alike either. And while the book does teach the things that our writer referred to tonight, I'll give you a simple example of people who don't think that way. The last 10 years of my wife's life, she worked down at the Baylor College of Dentistry. She had department heads who she worked for who came from different environments. One was just a good old ordinary, native USA person. And I don't remember what church he went to. Her second boss was a South African Jew. Wonderful gentleman. Been in their home. Think the world of them. Their families were plantation owners in South Africa. Fine manager. Her third boss was a Japanese Christian. Goes to a Bible church. He spoke at her funeral. Her third boss was a native of Tehran. He was Persian. I never heard him say the word Iran all the 10 years that I knew him. Been in their homes, spent a lot of time with them, counseled with them. I went down and helped him with his budget. He said, "Jim, you are a CPA. You help me with the numbers. I know how to fix the teeth. You know how to do the numbers." Anyway, a very interesting person. He spoke at her funeral as well. There was a lot of co-admiration of the religious beliefs right there within one department. It was an interesting thing to see. My wife was just openly blatant. She would post the stuff on her desk outside Dr. Telegani's office, and he didn't mind a bit. He said, "I wish," he would tell her, "I wish I could be what you are. I have read the Bible. I have not accepted it as my faith." But his family was so violent, they could not go home to Iran together. They had 2 children. Mama would go with the daughter. He would go with the son. If they went together, family members would have kidnapped them and kept them or killed them. So it's not all nice. It's not all cruel. You go to Indonesia and there's not nearly that much. So when you talk about religion, my word, we could talk about it from now until the end of time, and you get a lot of different viewpoints. But the fact, as I see it from reading and being a history buff, is that the foundations of the country were based on Judeo-Christian thinking and principles. They were not necessarily an extension of the Old or New Testament, but the thinking of the people, even if they were agnostics in their current thinking, had a very strong Judeo-Christian foundation and background. So I think I would tend to agree with what our speaker's thoughts and position was tonight, and I really do appreciate him coming tonight. I told him that we are very diverse, and even with some of those who are absent, who are on maybe a different channel than some of us, still those of us who are here, we've met enough, we know we're not all the same. And many of us have changed over time. But it's an interesting group. It's open. I hope our speaker felt welcome and open to say whatever he had to say, because we're not going to get up and throw our food at him, even if we don't agree with him. So I'll shut up on that.
Not yet.
Right. I won't do any more file dump. But I wanted to do a little bit. I've not spoken at the last few meetings, but with Tom absent, I thought I would do a little tonight, particularly without Susie here. We missed them tonight, didn't we? Mike and Susie, missing in action. Susan and Tom are in Chicago for the month of July. They went up and rented a condominium near where they lived before, I think down on Wasser Drive, right there just at the edge of the loop in the Chicago River. And so they're back home enjoying friends and family for a while. They'll be back the 1st of August. So with that, I will close out, invite our speaker to come back up and give us some closing remarks. And when he's finished, we will turn it off. Hopefully we'll get some cooler air next week, guys. I'm sorry for the heat.
Thank you. Great comment. Appreciate your hospitality very much. And, I guess we're all trying to find the best tool we can to make ours and other people's lives better. And I wish you all luck in the world in your pursuit, and I'll pray for my own also. So you folks, thank you very much for your hospitality.
This is William, your videographer from the KNON website. This is a trial video, and if you like it, please let us know in the comments below, or like us, or follow us, and we will find some more.